Hi Darren, it's August 2023 and this month sees a new 4K deluxe reissue of Talking Heads' classic concert film, Stop Making Sense. It documents a short run of shows in LA at the Pantages Theatre, 3 shows I think in the weeks leading up to Christmas of 1983. Essentially the final shows of the immensely successful Speaking in Tongues tour of the USA, which had run through from about August to October of the same year. Speaking in Tongues was up to that point the biggest selling album of the band's career in the USA at least, and spawned also their most successful US single in Burning Down the House, which reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100. A bit of personal history regarding me and Stop Making Sense. I first saw it on TV over the Christmas period in 1988. I was 16 years old, a big fan of Talking Heads by this point, and I wore out my home recorded VHS from that airing on BBC Two on the 30th of December. Yeah, I've lost track of the number of times I've seen this, 30, 40 times maybe, but if you're ever tempted to think, oh, I'll just listen to the soundtrack album, then hang your head in shame. Stop Making Sense is as much a movie experience as a live document, and I think it needs to be treated as such. So I rewatched the film recently. I'm just literally going to talk about it and point out some stuff along the way, some of which you may know, some you may not. And yet, Stop Making Sense is a pretty big stopover in my own musical journey, if you like. So yeah, tag along if you fancy a guided tour. The version of the film I'm referring to throughout, by the way, is the original theatrical cut without all the extra tracks either inserted or appended, as many of the reissues have done. So the opening credits and the title splash, we get the players credited, and most notably, the additional touring members are billed first before the core members of the band. Those core members being Tina Weymouth, Jerry Harrison, Chris Frantz, and of course David Byrne. I'll introduce these other players further in, but I think this is a really important feature of this movie. It's a very egalitarian presentation of the Speaking in Tongues touring band as a single unit. It's not presented as Talking Heads plus, these other people. And then we see Conceived for the Stage by David Byrne. This is a big signpost that this is going to be a much more theatrical experience than most rock gigs. And following a few other names, we get to directed by Jonathan Demme. Jonathan came up through the Roger Corman school of kind of low-budget schlock, B-movies, exploitation films, and his big breakthrough, I think, was 1980's Melvin and Howard. He did go on a much greater success later in the decade and into the 90s with very big critical box office hits like The Silence of the Lambs and Philadelphia. Demme had a long-standing love of music. He directed a range of music videos and documentaries for people like Neil Young, New Order, Robin Hitchcock, Suzanne Vega, many, many others. But Stop Making Sense was Demme's first movie-length, non-dramatic feature. So onto the opening number. Yeah, this is Psycho Killer. David arriving on a very, very bare stage with an acoustic guitar and a boombox. And yeah, here is where he says, "Hi, I've got a tape I want to play." Yeah, a beat starts up, not from the boombox, that's just a prop. Yeah, he was using a TR-808 drum machine tucked away at the mixing desk. And the camera pans up from David's shoes to his face and he begins to sing. You can take this as Act 1, Scene 1, if you like, of Stop Making Sense. And for me, this song, this version of this song, is now the definitive one. For me, it eclipses that studio, the full band version on the Talking Heads debut 77 album. So it dials back that vibe of the original, that kind of New York City, crazy downtown menace on the loose. And it settles into a more kind of internalized confusion, I think. This isn't really about the city anymore. This is about America at large. This is about technology, about progress. And the kind of the stuttering, failing beat of that 808 replaces those kind of hammering street noise guitar passages of the original. Yeah, this whole concept of David casting himself as some kind of naive or an outsider looking at modern America as a very confusing place to navigate, amongst all, the 24-hour television, the advertising, the shopping malls, MTV, super highways, progress in general. This is a theme that David would revisit again and again as the 80s advanced. And I think this version of Psycho Killer really bends into that territory. And as the song concludes, David kind of recovers from this kind of stumbling, malfunctioning beat. The shape of, the first act of Stop Making Sense begins to come into view. Song by song, the band is built up. The crew pushing on, risers with the gear on it onto a very bare, unfinished stage still, with a new member joining David one at a time. Tina Weymouth joins David for a version of Heaven. There is some additional backing vocals drifting in from off stage here. That would be Lynn Mabry, one of the two backing singers that would accompany the band for this tour. Next up, we get Chris France on drums arriving, breaking the show's muted colours kind of rule that had been laid down by David. He turns up in a turquoise polo shirt. And the band play a version of Thank You for Sending Me an Angel. Earliest kind of three-piece Talking Heads lineup represent. That joyous kind of clattering Marshall drum beat is great. It meshes wonderfully with the simple acoustic and bass arrangement. And I think here you start to spy the first kind of signs of the slightly staged, the constructed nature of Stop Making Sense. So the film draws on 3 separate performances across 3 nights at the Pantages. The first night was a fairly disastrous attempt to kind of light the audience for some reaction footage, which resulted in a very poor performance. The audience were freaked out. They weren't responding to the band in the same way, and the band just kind of, they just never found their groove. The second and third nights, however, were shot from stage left one night, stage right the other, so that there was never a chance of catching another cameraman in shot. And across all 3 nights, there were long kind of front-facing shots from different points in the theatre. But the film was going to have to sync up with, one take, the best audio take of the song from one of the nights, meaning there would be occasions where the lips or the instruments would kind of go out of sync with the video and audio, just down to minor performance variations from night to night. For the most part, this is hidden really well in the film. In Thank You for Sending Me an Angel, there's a very long, slow panning shot, a Steadicam shot around the back of Chris France's drum kit. This might be a purely artistic decision, or it might be a case that, David's lips just went out of sync slightly with the audio take they were using. It's something you kind of think of whenever you see a shot like this in the film. Jerry Harrison arrives next for a version of Found a Job, and this is where we get the full electric 4-piece Talking Heads for the first and the only time in Stop Making Sense. Again, a great take on this song, and there's one of my favourite shots in the film here. It's this amazing profile shot from stage left, showing all 3 of the front of stage members shuffling back and forth. I'm reminded of Wilco Johnson and Dr. Feelgood. And the end of this song signals the beginning of Act 2 of Stop Making Sense. This is the speaking in tongues section, I think, with the crew positioning Bernie Worrell's synthesizer, Black Curtain dropping, at the rear of the stage, signaling that construction time is over. This is it now. And over the course of the next 2 songs, that's Slippery People and Burning Down the House, the whole band assembles. First, we get Edna Holt, Lynn Mabry, and Steve Scales on percussion for Slippery People. And then they're joined by Bernie Worrell and Alex Weir on synth and second, third guitar for Burning Down the House. And back to the makeup of the band. For me, this is a big deal, I think. 83, 84, this was Reagan in the White House. A racist president, make no mistake, as the taped evidence has shown subsequently. But in Talking Heads, you have an ostensibly white band with a history of a huge appreciation of black music, Motown, funk, early hip-hop, African music, world music, and they're essentially giving equal billing to their entirely black American bandmates for this tour, for this album, and for this movie in particular. It's an important signal they're sending. And the musical landscape of the time was changing. Michael Jackson was finally getting MTV play for Billie Jean around about now, the first black artist to get heavy rotation on that channel. And this album, Talking Heads' most accessible, their most successful sales-wise, was foregrounding some hugely influential and talented black musicians to a white audience that may not have been aware of them up to this point. Going through these members, Bernie Worrell on keyboards, a founding member of the legendary P-Funk, Parliament Funkadelic, and an incredible musician. Alex Weir, the guitarist with the Brothers Johnson, very successful funk and R&B group of that time, probably most well known for their massive 1980 hit single, Stomp, which was a hit all over the world. Steve Scales on percussion. He followed his time in Talking Heads with stints playing with all sorts of bands, the B-52s, the Violent Femmes, the Psychedelic Furs. He's teamed up with David many times. Lynn Mabry, another ex-P-Funk member with many backing vocal credits to her name. And Edna Holt, ex of the Ritchie family. Again, huge list of backing vocal contributions as long as your arm. Luther Vandross, the Fatback Band, Brian Ferry even. A brief bit of Edna Holt trivia here. She reconvened with the band in LA after touring with them earlier in that year, and she was sporting a brutally short hairdo. David was most upset. Lynn and Edna's big hair-swinging dance moves had become a really important visual aspect of the show, and with only a day or so until they were due to film at the Pantages shows, they had to arrange a weave for her at very short notice. Next up, the band dip into Fear of Music, and they play a version of Life During Wartime, which I think really benefits from this extended band. A much looser kind of barreling, roof-raising take on the original, with David completely released from guitar duties for the first time. And with that freedom, he lets rip with some, wavy dancing, some strange arm moves, a little Dying Fly style roll around the floor. And the song culminates with a full band workout with David running several laps around the band as the song winds down. David closes this part of the show by asking the audience, does anybody have any questions? A brief gear trivia break here now. How many of these might you have spotted? David's Roland GR303 guitar. This is the original synth guitar, although I'm fairly certain he's just using it as a regular guitar for all the songs here. These were only made from about 1980 to about 84, 85 maybe. So this one, is a prime example of this guitar in the wild for those oddball guitar spotters out there. Alex is playing a Music Man Sabre 2. This was... Music Man was Leo Fender's stop-off between leaving Fender in 1965 and forming G&L in about 1980. They made lots of cool amps and guitars, and this mid to late kind of 70s Sabre, I think, is one of them. 2 humbuckers, active electronics, some cool extra switching options, a very nice guitar. And thirdly, there's Tina's iconic Hofner club bass. If you're Macca averse, the club bass is the violin that doesn't look like a violin. It's the same scale length, same pickups, fully hollow again, so light as a feather. I love Hofner's, and they sound great for this kind of dubby or low-down soulful stuff. Tina still plays one to the present day. So following that cut at the end of Life During Wartime, I think this is where Stop Making Sense steps up a gear, visually speaking, and a lot of the kind of the theatrical, the staging tricks that Byrne was so keen to use, they start to make an appearance here. He was very influenced by the work of the avant-garde theatre director Robert Wilson, and having spent quite a lot of time in Japan, by No Theatre. And both of these styles tend to disregard kind of the real world, the naturalistic, in favour of kind of much broader gestural kind of signifiers. The audience picks up on this and is kind of directed towards these things with very strong lighting, bold use of colour, and arresting costumes. You can consider this Act 2 of Stop Making Sense, and straight up before going into Making Flippy Floppy, some red backlit screens across the back display these very odd kind of word combinations, which had been selected by David just for their pure oddness in seeing them in isolation and then kind of pushing them up alongside one another. Things light up, you get some very high contrast, very stark individual spotlights on each of the band members, and you get a super interesting take on that recorded speaking in tongues sound. Some great snappy, excitable percussion. Alex Weir is providing that kind of funky chucker backing, and even David gets a great guitar kind of solo spot on his old Strat on this one. A very tasteful guitar player in his own right. And towards the song's conclusion, Bernie Worrell just spews out these huge, collapsing, ghostly synth lines. This song shows some phenomenal band interplay, and I think it's one of the best in the movie. And that red backlight kind of swamps the stage for the kind of the troubling swamp. This very devilish, dirgy tale hitched to a really catchy high chorus. It sounds like Tom Waits soundtracking a Pixar movie, and it's a very cool change of pace. Next, the first non-Talking Heads number in the show. That's What a Day That Was. This is taken from David's solo soundtrack from Twyla Tharp's theatre piece, The Catherine Wheel. And I'm just going to take a break here to talk about the cinematic side of Stop Making Sense again, because this is the perfect number to introduce the contribution of the cinematographer for this film. That's Jordan Cronenweth. David was working very closely with a lighting designer called Beverly Emmons, who lit many of Robert Wilson's productions. As part of the stage design, you might have noticed that all the mic stands are painted black to make them kind of disappear when lit, much the same way as the crew are all kind of dressed from head to toe in black. And although it's this collaboration that really puts what you see up on the stage, it's Jordan Cronenweth who managed to capture that on film. Yes, Jordan was a much admired American cinematographer who, despite a long career spanning some really great movies, I'm thinking Demme's Handled with Care, or Citizen's Band as it was called, Ken Russell's Altered States, Cutter's Way. Yeah, Jordan, though, became synonymous as the man behind the look of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. It's Cronenweth's incredible skill at sculpting and constructing light and shade for the camera. If you think of J.F. Sebastian's Bradbury apartment in Blade Runner, the interior of Tyrell's office, it's that same composition, that same style that pops out in this act of Stop Making Sense. And in this track in particular, no more so than in this kind of towering, underlit, nightmarish death mask thing going on, with these massive kind of shadows looming over the band, dancing around them. Yeah, it's one of the most visually striking sections of the whole film. Okay, who loves Lamp? I love Lamp. Brick loves Lamp, obviously. And clearly David, he loves Lamp too, because that's the lasting memory that most of us will have of the band's performance of This Must Be the Place in Stop Making Sense. Yeah, this is the lamp dance song. This is David going all Fred Astaire with a standing lamp. But here I think it's just the general warmth, the background shots. You see the main players huddled together across the front of the stage for the first time. The light that's bathing them is very warm and close. Yeah, there are so many wonderful moments in this performance and the way it's captured. There's a very sweet look and a laugh shared between Alex and Bernie after the second verse. Tina kind of gently plucking away at the harmonics on that cool old Fender Swinger guitar alongside Lynn and Edna. And if you look in the back, you'll see Chris France kind of singing along silently, blissfully with the words. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful song. And if you're wondering where the naive melody part of it comes from, the band all kind of swapped instruments in the studio when they were playing this to kind of get a different feel. Moving on next to Once in a Lifetime. And there's a very interesting shot here. Yeah, a single camera holds a long shot on David without cutting away for, I think, about 4 minutes here. Whilst he's dancing, gesturing, slapping himself in the head, shaking violently. This is David in full-on Pentecostal preacher mode, and the camera never looks away once. Until that is one of the greatest transitions in the movie. There's a final cut away from David to a kind of a profile shot of the band side lit. He's singing the line, "Time isn't holding us, time isn't after us." And it's moments like this, which is why Stop Making Sense has to be watched to be appreciated. And that kind of signals the end of Act 2, if you like, of Stop Making Sense. There's a brief intermission for a clothing change for David and to allow him to take on a little refreshment. And we join Tom Tom Club. Yeah, this had been a regular spot for Tom Tom Club in the set during the preceding tour, but Tina wasn't entirely comfortable with the song being included, Genius of Love, in the Stop Making Sense movie. Yeah, they were a very fractious band. There was regular locking of horns between David and other members. Yeah, this movie wasn't about Tom Tom Club, and she wanted to maintain a separate identity for the band and not just be seen as talking heads minus David. So she resisted having this included in the movie. She was eventually reassured by Demme that it was literally just there for the sake of the continuity of the show and it would not make the final movie. And as you can see, he lied. Yeah, and rather sadly, the first time Tina became aware of this was at the premiere, with her sisters in the audience, and she was absolutely furious. But taken in its own right, as it is now, as a costume change number, essentially, it's wonderful. It's a reminder, now at least, of how great that debut Tom Tom Club album was. This sunshiny cocktail of minimal funk, very naive hip-hop and reggae grooves. And don't blame them for Mariah's Daydream. I mean, how could they have known? And following this, David re-enters in the massive suit. That's it. What else to add, really? This is the track for the trailers, I guess you'd say. The band do Girlfriend Is Better. David's giant suit. Yeah, again, this nod to no theatre is lit initially, at least by a single handheld light, whilst his every move is massively amplified by this, huge squared off bulk. And yes, it's this song that features the line, Stop Making Sense, and which is kind of foregrounded in a rare moment of fourth wall breaking by David as he kind of offers the mic to the nearest cameraman mid-song. Just breaking off here for a little brief talk about narrative in Stop Making Sense. I mean, there's an obvious kind of meta, kind of a putting on a show narrative there, obviously the assembling of the band and the set. But according to Demme, there's more. And Byrne kind of corroborates this to some extent. It does depict the arc, if you like, of that starting character, the loner, the psycho killer, and his gradual evolution. There's a kind of a rough trajectory from loner to worker to lover to family man. But to me, this transformation doesn't come with too much in the way of enlightenment along the way. There's still confusion. Think of a few lines. Changed my hairstyle so many times now, don't know what I look like. And there's mystery, how did I get here? But I think Byrne sees these things as inevitable. It's the price of happiness, contentment in late 20th century America. And Demme seems to hint at all this in interviews as well. He talks of, this journey of the hapless white guy who sheds his neuroses and kind of discovers his mojo by the end of the movie. Yeah, this dovetails in quite nicely with another of Demme's films. His 1986 movie, Something Wild, features, a wild girl, a manic pixie girl who shakes up the very straight-laced kind of main character's life and his very existence. So moving on from that, if the girlfriend of the last song is the catalyst, then Take Me to the River, a cover of Al Green's 1974 classic, seems to revel in the kind of the sexual side of a song that casts the spiritual and the earthly alongside one another, salvation and satisfaction being two sides of the same coin. And it's here that Byrne ditches the big jacket. He dons a red baseball cap, for a crystal ball, and submits himself to the kind of conflicted ecstasy that lies at the song's core. The song also leads into an extended kind of breakdown section, and this is the closest the movie comes to a traditional concert film, where he's introducing the band members one by one. I think if the movie is truly to be seen as a kind of a pure celluloid take on an audience member's view of the concert, as a play, as a piece of theatre even, then we just have to let this bit go. It's not a problem. And speaking of that audience member's view, it's only this late in the day, really, during the closing number, a version of Remain in Lights, Cross-Eyed and Painless, that the camera ever really acknowledges the audience at all, with some isolated cutaways of 80s guys and girls getting down to all the onstage action. And I think that's this song's kind of purpose here. It's a good closer. It's a very drawn out funk groove that allows everyone a last share of the spotlight. Solos, noise, harmonies rise and fall, change hands. It's a very different take, I think, on the song than the live take from the Remain in Light tour. That was much more of a kind of a trance funk, whereas this is much more of a kind of a dance funk. I think if the aim is to let that kind of white guy character we've been following, to let him finally get down, then Cross-Eyed and Painless, mission accomplished. And that is the close of the movie. That's the end of Stop Making Sense. Is it still the greatest concert film ever made? I think so. Yeah, it features none of those kind of cliches, catching the band on the tour bus, backstage interviews, none of that. It just fully immerses you in the idea of being at a show, being in a very well staged show. It just translates that experience to the movie perfectly. Anyway, that's it. Yeah, all the usual things like subscriptions. You know the drill by now. Anything you want to do to help out the channel, that's great. Oh, and yeah, let me know down below what you think of Stop Making Sense. Is it still the greatest? But that's it from me for now. Yeah, thanks again for watching. You take care, and bye for now.